My parents, with all their audacity, invaded my residence while I was away for work reasons, occupying it for weeks, refusing to leave and even demanding to live there free of charge. The situation got worse to the point where I had to go to the police to remove them. Here's what unfolded. I'm 30 years old and my parents never really wanted to have children. As an only child, my conception was, according to reports from relatives, practically accidental. They stated, when married, that they did not plan to have children. My childhood was initially good, but as I grew out of the cute and adorable phase, my parents showed less interest in spending time with me. They both worked and had their own business, which they started together. This company became the center of their lives, relegating me to the background. Other close family members, like my grandparents, lived in distant states, and I barely knew them until adulthood. Therefore, I grew up practically raised by television and teachers. My own birthdays, as I became a teenager, often took place without my parents present. They simply gave me some money and instructions to buy whatever I wanted, a practice extended to Christmas and, sometimes, even school shopping. If it weren't for my insistence on buying an artificial Christmas tree to put up and take down every year after the age of 10, we wouldn't have even bothered to have a tree. If I could describe my parents, I would see them as those who always wear black, drink a lot of wine, and look down on others. The last time I saw them, they had the same posture and behavior, although my father now wore a wig. When I turned 16, I asked my parents to work part-time in their business, but they said there were no positions available. They could have been more direct, expressing that they didn't want me there after I turned 18. After finishing high school, my parents instructed me to pack my bags and leave without any help moving. I had to count on the help of a friend's father, who owns a truck. I ended up renting a terrible apartment and working retail with no real life experience and no time for college. After a few months, I was unfairly fired due to the questionable actions of my manager, who also acted this way towards other employees. I appealed to the company and others reported the manager, resulting in his dismissal for various reasons, including theft and involvement with cigarettes. The company refused to rehire me, simply changing my record to state that I was fired instead of laid off, preserving the cleanliness of my resume. I believe they considered me as if I was a defective product, something like that. I ended up going broke quickly because I was terrible at managing my own money and couldn't find a steady job. I lost my apartment and, desperate, I went back to my parents asking for help. However, they refused to take me in, not even for a brief period to recover. I ended up homeless, living in a tent in someone's backyard during the winter. While all my friends were going to college, some in other states, I was a broke young man, working any job I could get just to survive. My salvation came when a neighbor of my parents discovered that I was living in a tent and offered to take me in for a while, preventing me from freezing. She helped me pressure my parents enough to get them to tell me about other members of my estranged family that they kept secret. Although my guess is that my parents hid this information out of fear of being judged for kicking me out the way they did, they eventually relented. They gave me a list of contact details and then told me not to bother them ever again. It was then that I called my grandparents on my father's side of the family, who were surprised and happy to hear from me, as they hadn't seen me since childhood. I was their only grandson. My grandparents, upon discovering my situation, took me to live with them as soon as they could, practically adopting me. My parents didn't even walk me to the airport, despite being asked to do so. I had no contact with them for almost a decade. My grandparents revealed that they despised my parents for treating me so badly, going so far as to legally disown them by cutting them out of their wills. My parents, according to my grandparents, were not happy to hear this, but they claimed that it didn't matter as they were very rich and didn't need anything from them. However, the world took an interesting turn as, about a year after living with my grandparents, I was able to enroll in a community college, earn an associate's degree, and secure a decent job thanks to my grandfather's recommendation. Eventually, my grandparents offered to sell me their house so they could retire to Arizona. My grandmother longed for a warmer climate due to the increasing difficulty of facing the cold winter. Although I was sad to see them go, I happily bought their house for a third of its value and will pay it off in just a few more years. My work takes me to travel periodically, being away from home for weeks at a time. This doesn't bother me since I don't have pets or a girlfriend or anything like that. Honestly, I wouldn't have time for them now, but in a few years, when things are in order, I'll make sure to make time. I don't want to be a lonely bachelor for the rest of my life. Now, with all of this in mind, one day at the end of 2020, I returned home after just 2 weeks away, only to find a large white van in my driveway that I didn't recognize. I was about to call the police when I noticed that the van had my parents' company logo on the side, and at that moment, I felt a sense of dread. Yes, you nailed it. My parents were there. They invaded somehow and were living in my house. They had the audacity to greet me as if we were friends the moment I entered. I told them to get out of my house, but they refused, claiming it was Grandma and Grandpa's house. I argued that it was no longer their home as they had sold it to me when they retired. They would have known this if they had participated in my life in some way. However, they completely abandoned me 10 years ago, without any life experience. We argued, and they refused to leave. My father claimed it was his parents' house first, which apparently meant he and my mother had every right to live there if they wanted. I went straight into my room, locked the door, and called the police. When the police arrived, they were of no help. My parents claimed they had been there long enough to have residency, which was an absolute lie. I didn't have cameras to prove they hadn't been there for a month, and my neighbors didn't have cameras either. It was my word against theirs about how long they had actually been there, and they were claiming squatters' rights. They told the police that they had a verbal lease agreement with me and that I was illegally trying to evict them for no reason. My mom even started crying when she said that. The police told me it was a family dispute and to file an eviction with the courts to get them out. That was in 2020. Getting to court for anything took longer because of the pandemic. Meanwhile, my parents were occupying my house rent-free and rubbing it in my face for the information I received from them. Their business failed, and they sold almost everything they had to pay their debts. All they had left was the van and some personal belongings. They hoped to live in my house rent-free in the near future. They were both working, my father as a delivery driver and my mother as a sales associate. They were making money, and the only things they paid were the electricity and water bills, which basically amounted to handing me a $100 bill every month, saying that I should be grateful that they were paying me anything. Whenever I tried to discuss appropriate rent with them, they would just say that I owed it to them to live rent-free because I took 18 years of their lives. It's not like they're demanding their money back during this time. They threatened to stop helping with public services. I was so lost that I ended up calling my grandparents to explain the situation. They were very unhappy and spoke to my parents, but they still said they had every right to stay at my house and refused to budge on anything. My grandfather told me he was sorry this happened and that if they hadn't sold the house, my parents wouldn't have broken in. I told him not to regret it, as I had already filed for legal eviction and would get it soon. My parents already knew they were on borrowed time. I'm sure they heard it too. They just gave me the silent treatment. My father was away most of the time, driving a delivery vehicle 6 days a week, a job that really wasn't to his liking. My mother actually tried to take over my house in her spare time. She demanded that I allow her to rearrange my living room and even tried to pressure me into giving up the master bedroom to her and my father, all because they were my parents and they felt they deserved it. I categorically denied both of these demands, stating that they didn't deserve better and that they should stop trying to act like I owed them anything. I didn't ask to be born, and it is a normal responsibility of parents to raise their own children. All they were doing was trying to assert dominance to keep me from kicking them out. Finally, after 4 months, at the beginning of 2021, I managed to take my parents to court over their occupation. We just need to go to court because they resisted the eviction and tried to convince me to give up on it. They tried to use the fact that it was formerly my grandparents' house and the fact that they gave me $100 a month as an advantage for the residency. However, there was no real lease agreement, and they were smart enough not to try to forge one, thus avoiding fraud. The judge ordered that they needed to leave within 30 days as they had no claim on my house. After court, they confronted me and expressed disappointment that I had kicked out my own family. When I heard this, I couldn't help but laugh and call them hypocrites. They did exactly that to me, without a single concern for my well-being. They didn't have love for me, so I don't feel love for them. I owed them nothing. They tried to act as if everything that was mine was theirs, but they have no right to call themselves my parents, because they never acted like it. I called them two arrogant, lying narcissists to their faces and told them to get their affairs in order, as I would not hesitate to call the police if they did not leave my house when the 30 days were up. When I said this, my father looked furious, but my mother stopped him from saying or doing anything by grabbing his shoulder and shaking her head. He mocked me and left. They left, but not without a lot of tension. The last month has been spent with them blaming me for trying to change my mind or ignoring me completely. I put a calendar in the living room and marked each day before they had to leave with a red marker. The exact day they were supposed to be out was marked with a big red circle. My parents waited until the exact day they had to leave my home for good before they finally left. Even when all their stuff was out of the house, they still slept on the floor of the guest room for a few days, perhaps convinced they could get me to let them stay. They didn't even bother looking for an apartment until the legal eviction was approved, and my mother spent weeks struggling to find an apartment. They ended up getting a small, terrible studio in the next town over, because it was the only option they could find in such a short period of time. That's interesting karma, because that's exactly what I had to do when I was 18. The walls were a worn green hue, and the carpet looked to be at least 2 decades old. The single window offered a bleak view of a brick wall outside, and the absence of a dishwasher accentuated the uncomfortable simplicity of the place. My mother tried to give me sad looks, implying that I should feel guilty for making them live in such a modest space. However, I remained indifferent to these attempts until she finally gave up. They signed the contract immediately and began moving their belongings into the apartment over the weekend. To my surprise, they also insisted on taking the queen-size dresser and flat-screen TV from my guest room. I told them to get their things and leave, as I didn't want them in my house anymore. After spending 5 months in the room, they looked at me as if I was treating them unfairly. They didn't demand anything more. When it was time to leave for good, I began changing the locks on all the exterior doors. All of their trash was still in the apartment, and they spent their last night in my guest room. I witnessed the scene of them getting into the van while I ripped the old lock off the front door. We didn't exchange words, they just watched until I installed a new door handle, and finally they left. I felt immense relief the moment the van pulled away. However, to my surprise, my grandparents recently mentioned that they had heard about them. They called to boast about their new venture, similar to the previous one that went bankrupt, but apparently was thriving. This allowed them to resume their arrogant behavior, being dismissive of others. When researching their business online, I found that it is really doing well, with many positive reviews. However, I confess that I feel resentment at seeing them regain their status as snobbish businesspeople who look down on others, after having acted illegally in my house for months. If karma is a reality, it seems to be taking longer than desired. The situation is surreal, and I understand the original author's frustration. Dealing with such bad parents is a difficult experience, but the positive fact is that they are now out of your life. You were able to express your feelings and get revenge in a way, kicking them out when you needed to. While their world may be seemingly improving, at least you're free from dealing with them again. As for your personal situation with your boyfriend, it is a complex decision. If your concern is related to his lack of employment, it would be helpful to talk openly about the issue. Understand the reasons behind your choice and evaluate how it impacts the relationship. Consider your own values and needs, and make a decision that is best for your well-being and future. When I met my boyfriend, I believed he was fine because of the chic area where he lived. However, I discovered that he slept on his parents' couch and was unemployed. This didn't bother me initially as he was caring and patient. I invested in our vacations, buying gifts, staying in luxurious hotels, and providing several meals. I even considered buying us a house, joking that he was my sweet love. However, a recent discussion about the future of our relationship has brought concerns about the financial impact to the surface. I asked him what would happen to our relationship if I suddenly lost my money, and his response that it would be a shame left me deeply angry. This made me seriously rethink our relationship. His argument is that money should not define our relationship and that he contributes emotionally by being caring and understanding. I recognize that I am a demanding partner due to bipolar disorder and spoiling myself a little. I've been with him for a year because of his patience and affection, something I haven't experienced with ex-boyfriends from conventional jobs. However, I question whether this relationship is worth maintaining. He has no motivation to get a job, claiming that he prefers to channel his energy into other areas. Despite this, I'm afraid he relies mainly on his parents' allowance to support himself. I don't know if I should continue this dynamic, because although he dedicates time to taking care of me emotionally, I feel uncomfortable with the lack of financial contribution. He is 35 years old and, as long as I have known him, he has shown no interest in working. His justification is that he doesn't want a random job, preferring to invest his energy in other aspects of life. Considering his financial situation, I realized that he only receives money from his parents for his basic needs. I'm torn about what to do, because if I want longevity in the relationship, I believe he needs to take on financial responsibilities. At age 35, the lack of motivation to work becomes irresponsible, especially when his parents are his main source of support. Despite his emotional presence, I question whether he is using me for financial support and shelter. If I were in his position, I would seriously consider this situation, as it seems he sees our relationship as some kind of financial benefit. I think it's time to reflect on your own limits and priorities, making a decision that promotes your well-being and happiness. You are meeting all of his physical needs, but I believe you deserve better than this guy. Honestly, your boyfriend seems like a leech. Unless he makes significant changes, like getting a job, I see it being difficult to maintain this relationship. Additionally, his sleep issues are becoming concerning, and I'm unsure what to do. We've been together for 7 years and recently started living together. During previous trips and sleepovers, we had no major problems. However, on one recent occasion, I came home late from school and, as I tried to kiss his head while he slept, he woke up abruptly by grabbing my throat. Initially, I laughed at his startled reaction, but another night he woke up clutching my arm tightly. I've tried talking to him about seeking medical help and addressing unresolved trauma, but he avoids the topic. On some occasions, while sleeping, I put my arm around his neck without realizing it, and he reacts as if he is being suffocated. He admitted to having traumatic dreams involving his father and a car accident. His past includes a difficult childhood, witnessing physical fights between his father and his girlfriend, as well as having to intervene to protect his sisters. He often slept with a knife out of fear and had to call the police in the past due to the actions of his father's girlfriend. I am aware that he has been in therapy for 10 years but is reluctant to resume. The situation is becoming clearer, but I am undecided on how to proceed. His traumatic history and episodes of aggression during sleep are concerning, and I don't know what approach would be most appropriate at this time. He has faced his past traumas, but they seem to resurface in his sleep. He expressed concern that if he went to see a doctor, they would likely prescribe anti-anxiety medication or recommend therapy, something he is not willing to do. He asked me to avoid touching him while he slept, claiming that a serious incident occurred when I was not yet home, and he did not know who I was while I was sleeping. The situation is complex and delicate, and I am unsure what to do. It really is terrible what your boyfriend went through. It appears he is facing very intense post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Growing up in such a dangerous environment, where even sleeping is uncertain, must have been scary and obviously profoundly affected his life. While he may have dealt with his issues in the past, it appears there are still issues to be resolved. In this scenario, I believe therapy would be the best option for him. He manifests physical violence during his sleep, and I see that this could become a serious or even dangerous problem in the future. You've been lucky so far considering the incidents like when he almost punched you in the face after being woken up by a kiss. Sleeping in separate beds, at least for now, may be a necessary precaution. These problems clearly arise during sleep, and the last wish is that you hurt yourself in some way during these episodes. Thank you for sharing your story. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to continue following the stories. Use the playlist at the top of the description to access more content. In the next video on the HistoReddit channel, we explore an emotional story about a relationship marked by past traumas. While the protagonist faces post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, the consequences appear during his sleep, bringing significant challenges. We discuss the complexity of the situation and the importance of seeking professional help, such as therapy. Furthermore, we highlight the need for precaution, suggesting sleeping in separate beds temporarily to ensure safety. Don't miss this captivating story. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any details. Hit the playlist in the description for more intriguing content. Thanks for following HistoReddit.